All right, everybody. I'm really excited this week to have Rob Walling on the podcast. Rob, you have an amazing resume when it comes down to it. I could talk about it for hours because you've just done so much. You've built 7 different businesses from scratch up to 6 or 7 figures. You were behind the startup of Drip, which you sold. That was your most recent one. You're one of the founders of MicroConf. And if anyone in the SaaS world has been around for more than, 7 days, you know of MicroConf because it's the preeminent conference for SaaS startups out there. You're the host of Startups for the Rest of Us. You have Software by Rob. You are everywhere out there. And now you have TinySeed, which is a SaaS accelerator for bootstrappers. So I'm really excited to have you on the podcast. And just a quick reminder for those listening, this podcast is brought to you from Quiet Light Brokerage. We work with SaaS companies to help prepare you for sale and go through that process of an exit of those SaaS companies. We're entrepreneur-led. We're all entrepreneurs. We've sold our own online businesses for 6, 7, and 8 figures, each of us here at Quiet Light. And so we love talking to people like Rob because you have that same background as us. You've founded, you've bootstrapped, you've invested now, and you've sold. Let's get into some topics about what you're doing these days with things. So welcome to the podcast.
I'm fired up, man. Thanks for having me on. I've also bought, by the way, I don't know, that's a lesser known thing, but I've bought multiple SaaS apps. It's been a while since, I think my last one was 2011, but still, it's all the sides,
All the sides. And, you go to the different sides of the transaction and you learn something new about perspective when you're doing it. Because when you're selling, boy, sometimes the questions are like, why is he asking that? Or are these guys ever going to get moving on this deal? I mean, what do they need to know? And then you get to the buy side and you think, are they ever going to give us the details we actually need? Like, why are they being so hesitant to give us what we need? Perspective, right? Perspective on each side of the transaction.
Absolutely. And then investing is even different, right? Because the due diligence is different and, there's another layer there. So,
well, let's talk about that. This is your latest venture, TinySeed. Tell me about it in a word or two.
Yeah, it's the first startup accelerator designed for bootstrappers, bootstrap SaaS for that matter. And it sprang out of MicroConf. It's in essence another offering. And it's a year long. It's a remote accelerator. And we invest early stage SaaS, kind of the Y Combinator model where it's a certain amount of money for, a kind of a fixed percentage. We're in the middle of our second batch right now. We've invested in 23 companies.
23 companies.
23.
When did you guys start?
We started investing, I think we wrote our first checks in March of last year. So it's only been maybe 18 months. We did 10 in the first batch and 13 in the second. And frankly, we would have done, there were another 7 at least we wanted to, but our first fund was only $4.5 million. And we essentially ran out of money. So we're raising fund 2 now in order to invest in the next 200 to 300. I mean, we've proven out the model and the deal flow and the results and all that stuff is the early stages or early signs are really good. So actually, if someone's listening to this and you are interested in investing in early stage SaaS, tinyseed.com/invest. That'll be the only plug that I have the whole time, but it's really a way to diversify across a bunch of SaaS companies. And, as the multiples, the growth and the multiples on SaaS are pretty incredible or profitability. People who join TinySeed don't have to sell. I mean, that's a big differentiator between us and venture capital is they can just run it and throw off dividends.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned because I was actually going to mention that you have on TinySeed right now an investment page. And I mean, we talk to buyers all the time that would love to have something of a passive investment like that where they can ride on somebody else's work. And the work that you guys do, obviously, you're well known in the space. You have a good track record. So that's a great lead for people that are looking to make that additional investment. I want to talk in this episode, in our conversation here, I want to talk a lot about your advice with your experience for those that are looking to grow SaaS companies, because you're making these investments, right? And people aren't taking on these investments just to take your money, right? They want to grow, right?
Right.
And in addition, building up these companies to sell some of them as well. So let's start off. Let's start off with that. And what I'm kind of curious to start off with is, what do you look for in a SaaS company when you see it and you think this company has the right base ingredients for growth, as opposed to something else? I imagine you get a lot of pitches. Those first 20 some odd investments that you made, I'm sure you had more than 20 some odd pitches to you. And so you said no more often than you said yes, most likely. So what's the differentiating factor? Where do you look for growth in a SaaS company for kind of a nascent untapped growth?
Sure. Yeah. So we had almost 1,600 applicants to pick those 23. So it was a lot of work. It's a good problem to have, but of course it's still a problem to sift through that many and have the conversations. We do have this pretty extensive list in a Google Doc of kind of the checklist. Not even a checklist. It's like 42 different factors of the founding team and how they are, and the traction they have and different questions about it. But really, like on a podcast like this, I kind of boil it down to three things, and they all start with P, the letter P. So it's pretty easy. It's the people, it's product market fit, whether they have it or not, and it's a price sensitivity of their market. And so the people is basically the team, right? Are the founders, because obviously we don't just acquire the technology, we actually invest in the team. And so we have to believe that the team is motivated and interested in solving this problem, that they're getting shit done, that they're shipping, and that they're just a competent team. And that comes in all shapes and sizes, which is kind of cool. Like we aren't the traditional, I need a Stanford graduate. I think the Silicon Valley model is pretty kind of a little bit cookie cutter, and we are not. And so the people involved is a big thing. Whether they have product market fit, of course, is really, I just translate that to have they built something people want and are willing to pay for. And so we try to evaluate that. Like revenue traction is one piece of that, but some people have pretty low revenue, but they have ravenous fans, or they have ravenous customers, and their churn is really low, and their trial to paid conversion may not have a ton of traffic, but they're really converting well. And we're like, if they double that traffic or 5 times that traffic, which is pretty easily done, based on SEO or ads or whatever, we think that they're going to 5 times their growth, that type of thing. So product market fit is, because you can spend, as 12, 18, 24 months just flailing around trying to find that. And once you've found it, it's much more of a playbook from there. There's much more of a blueprint to growth. So that was the second P. And the third one is price sensitivity. And, the examples are, we looked at I'll say it was in the podcasting space, and the average revenue per user was like $12. And when we looked at how, I asked the founder, how are you going to raise that? He's like, I don't really know. And I don't have any way to raise that. And so even with 1,000 customers, you're making 12K MRR. Like that's tough, if you really are dealing with hobbyists. But then we invested in Squadcast, which is also in the podcast space. And they have a bunch of $12 a month customers, but then they also have a bunch of $50 to $100 a month customers. And they have customers paying them thousands of dollars a month because it's remote recording software. And so you get whoever you think of, NPR or Gimlet Media, or, anyone who has a big iHeartRadio, like they're willing to pay a lot of money. So that price sensitivity question is, can you find customers who are willing to pay you hundreds or thousands of dollars a month? Because those are the companies that do tend to grow fastest.
I'm fascinated that people is such a big piece of the pie for you. And this is actually something that I see as a common thread through some of the more renowned investors out there, right? We know that Warren Buffett takes a quick look at people. I know that the people over at Motley Fool, they talk a lot about management teams and those people making sure that they are right. But I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, this is more of one of those differences that happens when you're simply acquiring versus investing in a company, is that people element would be important. Would you say that's fair, or do you think that that's not necessarily the case?
That's interesting. Like when I sold Drip as an example, or when we sold Drip, I had a co-founder, we were a team of 10, and I think that our acquirer, Lead Pages, they wanted the people, but I think the people, the results of our growth and just the quality of the product we had built was more important. But they didn't just want the technology either, right? They wanted the team that had built it because they wanted another several years of that level of innovation. So I think there's a balance. And then of course, if you're just going to acquire technology, hey, I'm going to buy a SaaS app with no team, then obviously the team is much less relevant in that case. But when we're investing for the long term, if we want to invest in someone and we're essentially business partners with them. We're a super minority business partner, but we might be in business with these people for a decade or more. The team's important. We're going to work pretty closely with them. And I think there's a lot to that.
Yeah, I've got a lot of questions, but I want to get through the 3 Ps here first that you put together. The product market fit. Do you run into situations where you feel like the product market fit is just about there, right? You can see it, but maybe it hasn't proven out yet in the numbers. Yes. And how do you evaluate that?
It's tricky. I think the easy way to evaluate it is to look at rules of thumb metrics. It's like if you ask for credit card up front, how many people trial to paid, how many convert to, or from, visitor to trial to paid, how many stick around, what's your churn like? I mean, you can look at those and get an idea of if you're churning 10%, 12% a month, you have a problem somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
You probably a product market fit problem. But even if all those are locked in and you're only at 2K of MRR or 2,500, typically like my rule of thumb for product market fit is between about 5K and 10K a month of revenue. That's when most businesses find it. Now there are outliers. Some people find it really early, and then some people they just grind away for years and they can get to 15K, but I don't know that I've ever seen a business at 30K a month that didn't hit product market fit. It's too far outside that range. I think that's it. I mean, it really is like if you look at traffic numbers and you just run down the line of and I think the other thing is we have talked to like existing customers of some folks, especially like early Rabbit fans, and said like, what were you using before this? How does this solve your problem? Why is this so great? What do you love about it? Isn't there another? What's the alternative? Those are the types of things. If they've truly built something that's that unique for now, until they're essentially copied, because eventually someone's going to compete with them. That's kind of a good sign.
Yeah. So those are the three Ps. And you talked a little bit about the price sensitivity side of it as well, which is important. I've actually never heard anyone quote that as one of the key things that they're looking at. And I think that's makes a lot of sense. As you said, if it's $12 per user, then it's going to take a lot.
Yeah, a lot. And they tend to churn more. Like your lower price, it's counterintuitive, right? But lower price point tends to churn more. And you just have to find so many customers. You have to have a massive funnel. And truth be told, like I've only ever come to this realization in about the last 6 months is this thing called a dual funnel. That's the phrase I'm using for it, is having a high volume, lower price funnel. You can build a great business, right? You can build a 7-figure business at, let's say your average revenue per user is 20, 30, 40 a month. Like that's relatively low price, but like if you get, 100 new customers a month, like that's pretty decently growing business. And then there are the really slow slog enterprise sales where it's like every contract is 6 months, but it's a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 annual contract value. And those can also be great businesses, but the ones that I'm seeing that are just rocketing, and Squadcast is like a good example, is they have both. They have dual funnel because they have the fly fisherman who's paying them $12 a month, and they have maybe the Mark Douster, the Rob Walling, who's like a business podcaster who's paying, or maybe $50 a month, and that's totally a reasonable amount for my podcast. But then again, you get that big iHeartRadio, or the Gimlet or whatever, who to them $3,000, $4,000 a month in recording costs is not that big of a deal. And so having both sides of that funnel, both the enterprise and the wide funnel, is pretty magical.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you see so many companies kind of pick that path that they're either enterprise, they're going to play to the enterprise level, or they're going to play to just the average consumer rather than going that dual funnel route. I wonder what's behind that. Do you think that's just a matter of organizational focus rather than trying to split that attention?
Yeah, well, I think the traditional venture, the VC model, if you go to Silicon Valley, is go after enterprise, go after high price. The Jason Lemkin approach, right? SaaStr. It's like high price, all enterprise sales, cold outbound, boom, just grind it out. So that's their playbook. Whereas a lot of kind of maybe the bootstrapper or I want lifestyle businesses to go, I want low headache. I don't want to deal with the pain of enterprise. And so I'm going to do the $10 a month or the $40 a month or whatever. But so I think those camps maybe separate there. But realistically, the advantage is that if you have this wide funnel, you start to build a brand, right? If you get 500 or 1,000 or 2,000 customers at that lower price point, you won't have so much revenue, but a lot of people know who you are and you're just at the top of mind. It's like, what are the 2 tools in the space that do this? And you're always one of those 2. Well, then when the big companies come around, if the ESPN or the Target or the Best Buy or the Verizon suddenly needs a tool like that, you're one of the 2. And that's where you can have massive, there's a company called Wufoo, all right, WUFOO. It was a Y Combinator company that got acquired by SurveyMonkey. And I remember when they got acquired, this at least 5 years ago, in the press release, they say we sold for millions of dollars. 80% of our revenue or 90% of our revenue was from like 7% of our customers. All of it was this enterprise stuff. They had they had a big free plan. And I thought Wufoo was really this consumer play, or SMB play. But they had they had thousands and thousands of customers on their SMB plan. But the amount of revenue from them was very small. But they had mind share, and they had brand and they had reputation, and the real money came from these enterprise ones. So I would prefer for it not to be that far out of balance if I own the business, but there is an advantage to the kind of this dual funnel model, I think, if you can engineer that.
That's fascinating. I have a good friend who did subscription-based businesses for a long time, and he preferred to have that private individual SMB sort of approach. And his whole argument was, I can lose 30 clients in 1 month, and the impact on my revenue is negligible. Whereas if you have the enterprise, it's 80% of revenue coming from that few. That's scary stuff. You lose a contract, and if your fixed costs are too high, you're screwed.
Yeah, I would prefer to be more diversified than my recollection of them. But it is an extreme example. That's
fascinating. I mean, I know obviously most people have been around for a while know Woof and what they were doing. I had no idea. I had no idea. All right, so people are taking some of these investments from TinySeed. They aren't just taking it again with the idea of to take your money. They want a goal, and that's typically growth, right?
Yep.
Okay. Let's talk about some of the things that you look for growth, as far as some of the high leverage techniques that you're using to help these companies scale up and grow. And then the follow-up question to that I would like to just have in mind is, to what end? Is it growth for the sake of growth to hang on to, or is it growth to eventually sell?
Yeah, I'll take that latter one first, actually. Right. Folks who take money from us, I mean, one of the reasons we are different than traditional venture capital is, if folks take money from us, they can sell if they want. They're in control, right? We don't have the ability to block a sale. We're a super minority shareholder, but they can sell if they want. They can throw off dividends if they want. And obviously we get a pro rata share of that as owners in the business. Or eventually, if they wanted to buy us out, we can work that out. Those are kind of the three paths to working with us as investors.
So lots of flexibility on their side.
Yeah, flexibility, right. And as a result, they can be a C Corp or an LLC, which is, again, different. Normally it's Delaware C Corp if you're going to raise venture. And with us, we have C Corps in, I don't know, of the 23, like at least 8 of them are in just random states, wherever the person lived, Arizona C Corp or Arizona LLC or whatever. So that's the optionality we want to give people, because, again, I've run my own businesses and I didn't necessarily want to sell them, although I wound up doing that. That wasn't the goal from the start. In terms of growth, there's a couple things. The money tends to help people, if they have a channel that's working, like AdWords is working, they can pour money into it. If they need more features to move faster, then they often hire a developer. Some of it often goes to resources, human resources. But the bigger thing we provide is direct mentorship and advice, pretty prescriptive, especially early on. And then we have a network of SaaS mentors. If you go to tinyseed.com/people, you'll see, I mean, it's kind of the all-star cast of SaaS, right? It's like Basecamp, the Basecamp co-founders. It's Rand Fishkin, Heaton Shaw,
David Heinemeier Hansen, Jason Fried. I mean, I was looking at this and just thinking, oh my gosh, this is like an amazing list of mentors.
Right. And so that the mentorship allows people to get there very fast, right? They'll raise something in Slack of like, hey, how has anyone ever dealt with this? And the odds are pretty good, no matter how esoteric, someone's dealt with this. And someone either can give you advice, or they know a consultant that it's like, this person's good, go pay him $1,000 and suddenly you've saved yourself 3 weeks of looking around on Upwork and blah, blah, blah. Or you go to Rand Fishkin for advice about SEO or integrations or something. And it's like, oh, wow, that literally changed the course of someone's business. So the mentorship and the advice, both from the mentors and myself, obviously, and my co-founder, Einar Volstead, who's big time into enterprise sales and cold email. But so that's a piece. That's the just-in-time advice, which is obviously, worth quite a bit. But this other piece we focus on really early, we call it the TinySeed Playbook. And we have 5 parts to it. And we go through one every other week for the first 10 weeks in essence. And the first thing we do is we look at funnels. And so we talk a lot, we do like a 40-minute talk with slides about how I just talked about kind of low touch funnels, high touch funnels, and dual funnels. Like I just have a whole talk that we've never done in public that we do for them. And then we do case studies, right? We just start digging in, like, call out, what's your price points? Let's look at, you can't do enterprise sales when you're charging $30 a month, right? We had a company in batch 1 who was doing that. And it's like, the numbers just don't work because it just doesn't work. You're never going to grow. You can't even afford to, pay for a salesperson to do that. So in batch 1, like, this company doubled their pricing and then doubled it again. and then doubled it again. Like they just kept, so they went from $30 a month as their low plan up to $250 a month as their low plan because the economics didn't work. So funnels is the first, pricing is the second, and frankly, pricing is the biggest leverage, biggest lever in any SaaS app. And I think almost all of us are underpriced most of the time, and until you really sat down and looked at it. And so that was something we drilled down in the first meeting of batch 2. I asked for a show of hands, and I think it was 70 or 80% of companies raised their hand when I said, who thinks they're either underpriced or that their value metric is off, meaning just the way you're charging is off. And, everyone raises their hand. And so then we dig in, and we, more than half the batch raised their prices in the first month. And I was actually I just took a screenshot of one of their revenue, 2 of their revenue graphs, and put them in the internal Slack with just my team and said, look at this. That was the month we told them everybody doubled their pricing. And you can just see it's not a hockey stick, but it's an absolute noticeable thing because they doubled the price and the same amount of customers come through. So in essence, growth is doubled with all you did was change a number on a website, and it's like, that's it. No new features, no big production, didn't have to sell to more people. It's just a number. So that's where pricing is like the biggest lever that we drill home. And we don't tell everyone, hey, you have to double your prices. We don't say that, but it's like, it's pretty, I've seen enough patterns now that we look at it and we're like, yeah, again, Best Buy comes to you and says, oh, we need your software, and you're going to charge them like $300 a month. No way. Like it should be $3,000 a month at least for what they're going to use it for.
I want to stop you on this pricing thing because I can already hear the objections and people screaming in their heads, especially the business owners, screaming out of fright as to what happens. And I'm going to bring up Drip as the example, right? When they raised their prices, what was it? That was a year and a half ago now, I think. They raised their prices, and I'm not here to dump on Drip, but it didn't go well.
Sure.
Right? It met a lot of public resistance, and I know people that they lost for customers, including myself. Quiet Light is still on Drip, but the other company I have, we moved off of that plan. And I also know some of the competitors. Boy, did they smell blood in the water. They were very proactive in picking up clients. So talk to me about that. Talk to me about that business owner who says, I don't want to double prices. I'm going to lose clients. Sure. And how do you go about that if you're not adding features? Because that was Drip's MO, right? Hey, we haven't raised prices in a long time, and we've got a lot of new exciting features coming out. Well, the cynic side of me, whenever I saw them add like a new feature, I was like, that's what you raised my prices for? Really? Come on. It didn't play well. Again, I'm not here to dump on them.
Sure.
Things like that.
It's an example of a company who really fumbled the ball when they raised their prices.
Right. So how do you not?
Yeah. That's really the question, right? Yeah. Well, so there's a couple things. I mean, you have to decide, like a lot of our companies are so, imagine a company doing 10K of MRR with 100 customers. Well, they just raise their pricing on their pricing page and they grandfather everybody else in because doubling everybody else's price isn't, you know what I mean? And you don't have to do that. It's not an always grandfather thing, but in the early days, maybe just grandfather, your early for now, and wait till you get a few years down the line, and then they should be paying you 5 times, and then come to them and say, hey, look, we have 5x pricing, which hopefully you do over time, or at least 2 or 3x, whatever you get to, and then go back to them and say, look, it's been 3 years. I do want to get you up to at least half of our current real pricing. That's how you treat, right? And you can do that carefully, and that's what Drip didn't do. I don't want to dump on Drip either. I wasn't there when they did that, but they just kind of made all the mistakes that you make. They didn't give much notice.
No,
they didn't
like 2 weeks, I think.
2 weeks, which is you need. I mean, if I were to do it, I'd give 90 days minimum, maybe 6 months max, within that range of like, hey, we are raising prices. But then you say, here's why. You point out specific features that you've increased. Hey, we are going to grandfather, or we're not. And if you're not, you need to really justify why you're not, right? Of like, hey, all of our competitors are more expensive, or whatever else the reason is. So yeah, there's a right and wrong way to do it. Raising prices, the other scary thing, even if you grandfather, the other scary thing is you think you're going to raise it and then you're just going to basically dry up your growth, that no one's going to buy. Man, they've been paying 50 a month and I'm going to go to 100. No, this tool is not worth 100 a month. And if you find that, like if you raise it to 100 and growth does stagnate, well, then you just drop it down to, whether you drop it down to 50 or 75 at that point, you do. But again, we found that a lot of our companies, they raise it and then they're like, wait a minute, I'm getting literally the same number of new customers and I've doubled my growth. Like it's crazy to see it over and over.
Yeah, and I think there's the other element there of pricing can sometimes imply value as well, right?
Yeah.
It's that inverse law, right? Low cost services churn higher because you don't attach as much value to it. And I think there's a lot more intentionality. If I sign up for a service I'm paying $500 a month for, I'm going to take the time to go through that onboarding to make sure I am using that and using it well. But if I sign up for something that's 10 bucks a month, yeah, I'll sign up. I'll look at it. I'll play around with it a little bit, and then maybe I'll get to it in a few weeks. And then 3 months later, when I see that recurring charge come through, I'll be like, just cancel.
Yep.
I had no commitment to it. No commitment to it. All right. So we talked about raising pricing. I think that's fantastic advice. We dumped a little bit on Drip. They're a good company. So again, that wasn't the intent, but they are a good case study.
I have several. I have several Drip accounts. I still a good tool.
Well, actually, something else that they did, again, I don't want to belabor the point, but something else that they did that I would just say don't do is they grandfathered for those that were willing to switch from monthly to annual subscriptions. Mm-hmm. And one of the big complaints there is it felt extortionary, right? Like, you'll grandfather me if I pay you 12 months in advance. Like, right. That it really came off wrong. So again, it's a good case study of what not to do. I think their justification for raising prices made sense. At the end, it was just a poor rollout plan. Yep. AdWords, you mentioned that. Obviously, if AdWords is working well, be continuing to feed that funnel. What other areas would you look at for some of these high leverage things, or that you guys have looked at for high leverage growth opportunities?
Yeah, so there's understanding your funnel and the economics of it, and sample conversion rates. That's all the stuff we run through, and then of course pricing, and we look at examples and how to increase that if you think you're off, and how to adjust your value metric, right? So if you're charging based on number of subscribers, is that the right thing you should be charging on? If you're charging on number of seats, is that the right thing you should be charging on? Part 3 of the playbook is just an in-depth sales conversation about what sales actually is, enterprise SaaS sales or like medium to high touch SaaS sales. Really, it's consider yourself a high paid consultant, but you're just not paid. You're paid and people not churning. And that's truly what you're trying to do, is find the best solution. And I remember at Drip and at HitTail before that, I would come in and just say, I'd talk to someone and say, you know what, we're actually not the best fit for you. And I would literally refer them out to a competitor who I thought, like, oftentimes MailChimp is a really good tool. And if all you're going to do is send broadcasts, I actually wouldn't use Drip. We were always more expensive than MailChimp. It's like, you don't need all the automations, and that. So being that consultant and actually being just honest and ethical about it and thinking about it is a big thing. So Einar does kind of a sales one-on-one and then like 102 class, within about 30, 40 minutes. Because being able to sell, especially when I talk about this dual funnel or the enterprise funnel, it's kind of a necessity, right, in a SaaS org, unless you're going to be totally, on the kind of the low touch funnel. And then go ahead.
I was going to ask, at what point should a company think about that? Because that definitely seems to be a choke point for a lot of companies, is building out that sales team and the sales processes involved to be efficient.
Yeah. I mean, until you can hire, the advice that I keep hearing, and it's tough, but I'm kind of on board with it, is until you can hire 2 salespeople, have the founding team do it. Because you need to hire 2 at once, because you just don't know if one fails, you don't know if it was you, if it was your market, if it was your training, if it was all these things. But if 2 fail, you probably screwed up. And if 1 succeeds, that 1 was good, and if both succeed, then amazing, so and there's competitive, nature between salespeople. So the people who I know, like the Stelly FD or the Damian Thompson, who in my opinion know sales and have lived and breathed it for 10, 15, 20 years, they all say that same thing. And so that's, and of course, so then that dictates, well, if I'm doing 10K MRR, I don't have enough money to hire 2 salespeople. So I'm not going to do it yet. So to me, it's in that, I don't know, what 20 to 40K MRR range if you really need it. Yeah. So beyond sales, then, lead generation is the next thing we talk about. And we basically just look at what are all the traction channels that you could look at, ranging from, there's all manner of paid acquisition, there's all manner of organic acquisition, and then there's all the creative things like the trade shows. I mean, trade shows and cold email still work really well in certain niches that are not inundated, with cold email. And that, of course, right now there's no in-person events, but certain small niches, like let's say you're in HR or you're in construction, or construction commissioning. We have a company in batch 2 who's it's a very tight niche, and there's only a couple thousand companies in the country who would buy it. But they all go to this event. And so he goes to this one event every year, and that's like a huge source of leads to him. And you would never do that. I wouldn't go, I don't know, if you're an ESP, it's like, what event are you going to go to? Maybe go to traffic and conversion or something, but they're just not, it's not the same thing when you are a horizontal app. So there's
Right.
a lot of creative ways to generate leads there.
For those companies, going to an event is more to be there and to show up and to be in people's minds, as opposed to actually retaining new clients.
Yeah. Events for sales versus events for branding, and the appearance.
Right.
So yeah, we run through all kinds of lead gen stuff, and really it's just a palette. We're trying to give them a buffet of like, when we do ask around, what's working for everyone? Raise your hand so that because it's a batch, right? So there's 13 companies. It's like, oh, look around. Who SEO is working for these people? If you're trying to get it to work, go to that. Go to those fellow kind of batchmates. And then the last thing, the fifth part of the playbook is hiring, and we look at hiring that first support person. We look at hiring the first, developer or product person or whatever, and talk lightly about org structure, because I think a lot of people don't know and understand that. And it's pretty easy to, you hire your first customer success person and you say, oh, you're my head of customer success because you're the only one. And it's like, well, how do you know that? So when you hire 2, 3 more, are they automatically going to manage those other ones? Should they? So just easy with the titles. Title inflation can really come back to bite you. Is kind of one thing we talk about, in addition to just hiring basics of, how to write a good job description and that kind of stuff. Because having good people, as you know, if you're going to build a team of even 5 people, it's like you really need good people, because if you have B and C players, you're just not going to make the progress you want.
Yeah, having good people and having good culture are 2 things that make such a big difference. And I've owned multiple companies, right? I've owned companies with great culture. I would put Quiet Light definitely in that category. Our culture is fantastic, and everyone that works with us, everyone says the same thing. This is the best company I've ever worked for. This is so much fun. I've had other companies, because most of my companies are virtual, right? Where everyone lives in different states. People don't know each other, and trying to build that culture can be really difficult to do, especially if you don't have the right person mix in that. So that's fascinating. We blew through 30 minutes.
Did we already?
I can't believe I was going to start jumping into other questions, but I'm not, because we blew through 30 minutes, and we'll go through another 30 minutes if we don't do that. So TinySeed, you guys do have investments open. When are you going to be making your next round of investments? Or is that just an ongoing process?
We do right now we'll do the next batch. I think we'll open up for applications in January of 2021. So what is it? It's September right now. And then we're going to start doing 2 batches a year in the US, because we found that just the volume is that the deal flow, the number, deal flow is a weird way, is the investor way of saying it, but just the number of companies that need and or desire this is ample. And once we have Fund 2, we'll have the money to be able to invest. And then we're looking at expanding into Europe and the APAC, and go there. So
that's super exciting. I mean, there's a wealth of knowledge that you can offer people. Thank you for sharing the basic playbook that you guys go through with the companies that you invest in. I think there's just a lot of stuff to digest there. So really appreciate you coming on, guys. Check it out, tinyseed.com or any of your other blogs.
RobWalling.com. Yeah, Startup for the Rest of Us. If you listen to podcasts, that'd be the place to go. Startup for the Rest of Us every week for more than 10 years now, 512 episodes. And I talk about, it's bootstrapping Saas really is what we talk about. So
500 episodes. That's a ton. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Hey, Rob, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely, man. My pleasure.